That's tough. It's really, really tough to thread that needle, especially with a higher mileage person. So there's two options here in my mind, because this is something I was not comfortable with and like certainly not an expert in. You can kind of dive into some of the running world stuff and get more adept at it. Or what you can do is help them find a running coach that's going to help transition them. Okay. Those are two options. I think we are very much as physical therapists well equipped to manage this because at the end of the day, it's just graded exposure. Okay. So what I want everyone to understand is like there's all these different rest like these different like, oh, it should be 10% rule or rule of this, rule of that, right? And there's progressions. But at the end of the day, all we're doing is we're applying a stimulus and then we're monitoring a response. If I'm applying an initial stimulus where I don't have a lot of confidence in how the system is going to adapt to it, do I want to undershoot or overshoot? I want to
I'd
under
say, yeah.
I want to undershoot, right? So always start with something that you have like a so all you're doing when you progress this stuff is you're managing the probability they don't have a problem. Okay. So based off of your knowledge of them, where they're at in the process, how ready they are to go, start with a dosage that's low and something that they can audit, meaning something that, again, they're not going to overshoot with. And then they can track how they feel during 24, 48 hours after, and then make a decision based off of that, what you're going to do next. So this needs to be an emergent process where there's going to be changes based off of feedback. As you start going and start getting more applications of stimulus to the system, you're going to start having more understanding of how the system is going to respond to the stress, which means now you have a larger bandwidth for error. So now you can start shooting a little bit closer to where they need to go. So again, this is just your 10% rule often hits this, but for high milers, it's like if you do the math, it's like painstakingly slow, and it's probably not useful for them. You can probably go a little more aggressively with that. But again, it's kind of having conversations about, okay, what kind of like how do we manage a massive setback? Okay. If I overshoot a little bit, what's going to happen and how do I manage that? So you're giving this person to say, all right, here's our thing. We're going to go from A to B. Okay. If B feels good, we're going to go to C. If B doesn't feel good, and qualify what that means, that means we have swelling. That means we have loss of this. That means we have greater than 3 out of 10 pain. Then we're going to do this. So talk them through your process. And your process doesn't have to be perfect because it's never going to be perfect because it's going to be emergent as you go. Does that make sense?
And then I'll jump in real fast
Yeah,
because
please.
that pain module or like the amount of pain they should have is part of this module. So I'm glad you said that. So this second module, it's like what pain rules or what progression criteria are you going to give them? Like, hey, that worked or that didn't work. So we'll be talking about that later this month as well. Just kind of like, where is that threshold? And then mentally for the patient, like Aunt saying, if you are getting to the point where you want to progress or regress, which feels better to the person, and makes them feel successful, definitely progressions, right? So if you start big and you have to regress and regress and regress, you're like, crap, like they start feeling bad, like negative thoughts, blah, blah, blah. So then we're struggling again. But if you regress so slowly, they're like, man, successful, boom. Then mentally, we're building a confidence that I can run. So just kind of keep that mental state in mind as well for that too.
Yeah, set them up exactly. Set them up for success. Manage the probability and like that they're not gonna have a setback by doing exactly what Corey said, undershoot, and then all you're gonna do is you're gonna keep monitoring until you have more confidence in the system. And what you can do too is like Kayla, like start looking at like do research and start looking at like what would a normal non-injured marathon program look like, and ask them like, hey, what would your if you weren't injured, what would your program look like? Because your goal is ultimately to get them back to like unconstrained training like they want to do. So that's your terminal task. And all you're doing is reverse engineering getting them back to that. So you don't have to be their marathon coach. You just have to get them back to the point where they can enter back into the process and then understand how to navigate it and how maybe to manipulate things based off of their specific condition. I just sent you guys a paper. That is probably my favorite like framework paper on running related injuries, Bertelson's. It's phenomenal. So it gets into this, like this is the money graph here. So basically what it does, and I think this is the best explanation for, because we didn't really talk about, we didn't talk really about like, because I don't think it was as pertinent today, but like what drives running related injuries, or why do they happen? But I think when we understand why they happen, even if it wasn't a running related injury that got them there, understanding these constituent parts is going to help you to navigate the process. So what Bertelson will talk about in this paper is we're going to look at a couple different categories, right? And they're all going to merge together. So structure specific load capacity. So this is the previous training, the running diet, previous injury, disease, sleep. So all the other things that are going on in the background. So then you have a magnitude of load applied per stride. So this now comes down to what is the force? What is their running style? What is their body weight? What terrain are they on? What's their speed? How is the load distributed? So are they a kind of fast pounding runner? Are they a striking under center mass? Are they forefoot? Are they rear foot? What age are they? What kind of shoes are they wearing? What surface they're running on? What are the number of strides? So that equates to what's the structure specific load per stride? And then now this all stuff, and then reduction of structure specific load capacity during a running session. This all comes down to this factor of structure specific load capacity exceeded. And now we have a running related injury. So if we reverse engineer this, we can manage a lot of this other stuff. So what you need to do is figure out like what is your manipulable variable based off the injury they have and based off what you can control. What can I control in here? The one you're always going to be able to control is constraining number of strides, right? We might not be able to control this. We might not be able to control this, but I might be able to manage this a little bit. So what can I control? So if I dose appropriately, that's probably one of our biggest tools for this whole thing. Any other thoughts or questions?
I just want to thank you, Ant, for doing this. We really appreciate it and very helpful information. So thank you so much for putting that together.
Not a problem. I'll leave you with this. This is kind of one of my favorite definitions, and it kind of comes back to the crux of what we're talking about. Like, I think this term, like chaos engineering, is like a way cooler description of what we do than physical therapy. So look at this. It's the discipline of experimenting on a system in order to build confidence in the system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production. So what we just said there, Kayla, is like, you don't have to know, like any of this stuff, you don't have to know. There's never going to be a perfect answer. So all we're doing with all our exercises, all our tests, all our interventions, it's an experiment. We're trying to gain a better understanding of how the system manages, how it's going to deal with turbulent conditions in production. What those tests tell us is, oh, they can manage X. If they can manage X, there's a greater probability they're going to be able to manage Y. Then when they manage Y, I know they can probably manage Z. And you keep going through that process until they get to the terminal task. So that's the way to look at this stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be messy, but just be safe, be cautious, be process oriented, and understand how you can manipulate force and how you can manipulate different variables. Just slowly titrate things rather than going big steps, big steps, big steps, because big steps create problems. Your progression regressions live in those middle grounds. And that lives in little changes, not big changes.
I do have one more question for you before you go. In like higher level athletes that are coming in, for example, my soccer player who's back to soccer but shouldn't be, what would be like your go-to like testing at evaluation? Like what's like something that you would look at?
What do you want to know?
Like what's your like a good go-to for like endurance and runner athletes that you like to look at if they're at higher level and they are just dealing with, let's say, like a little bit of pain with running or something like that, as
So,
opposed to like like coming in fresh ACL stuff like that, where obviously we're not gonna do like triple hop and stuff like that initially.
so I guess I'm asking like like when you think of any testing, okay, what question are you trying to answer? So it always comes down to that first. So
So for sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mean, for me, like looking at running mechanics, but that's not always something that we have time to do necessarily on the first day, but that's something that can come in later on. But do you say, because I like what you were saying, like let's show them, not tell them what they are capable of doing. So like, do you think that, have you felt like you've had success with, let's say, like videoing them and their gait with running on a treadmill or doing like light jog or any other like the triple hop test, or just that's just an example. Like what do you feel, I know it's everything is always patient specific and the answer is it depends, but like what's something that's like you feel is effective for day one to say like here's what you're capable of doing and here are also the deficits that you have, kind of to be able to build goals to work from.
100%. I got you. Okay. Really good question. Really good question. Really good question. So I'm going to give a quick, I know we're running over time, so if he has to go, but I'll talk through this and then we can kind of get off the call. But I'll give you a really good case example of something like this that I think will help answer your question. If it doesn't, stop me and tell me. So we had when I was back in the clinic, we had a high school, like a pretty high level high school sprinter come in. And she used to go to the school I was working at, and then she had to transfer out. So she was now doing her own running programming, and she came in with like some Achilles tendon issues. So high level runner, 2 weeks into training, Achilles tendon issues. And she basically said like she'd been doing her own programming, just started 2 weeks ago. So my student was running this evaluation. So she knocked this thing out of the park. It was amazing. So she did the process. So we start and look at our different buckets of function. Range of motion. Does she have the requisite range of motion to access the position she needs? So a situation there would be, let's say she has a significant limitation in dorsiflexion on the affected side versus the unaffected side. We can now posit that she might not have the prerequisite range of motion to get in positions for whatever reason. This might be affecting the way she's interacting with the ground, which affects the force and how it distributes up the Achilles. Something we should address. Not a problem. Really good. She looked at coordination. So we looked at fundamental patterns. We looked at her ability to stabilize. We looked at her ability to get in and out of certain positions that would be representative shapes of running. Knocked it out of the park. Great. We looked at strength. Heel raise testing, fast and slow. So slow to fast. Low load to high load. All was good, pain-free. Strength looked like she had enough to manage. We looked at elasticity. So what she looked like when we started looking at, now faster rates of force, more elastic stuff. Looked good, no real problems. We couldn't really elicit pain. Okay. We started looking at endurance. No real things going. So she went through all her checkpoints to look at, basically look under the hood and look at the physical capacity of the athlete to see if anything jumped out. So, and then we didn't really have the ability to look at mechanics, and it wasn't something we wanted to dive into that point, but that's something we could have went into if we thought that was going to be the rate limiting variable. But with our indications there wasn't really a reason to jump on that right then and there.